Hello everyone, my name is Xana and I like to make poor reading choices. If you're new here, congrats, so am I. This video is going to be a recap of everything that I read in October. If you saw my last video, I have good news. I made fewer questionable reading choices this month. Now, that's not to say I didn't make any questionable reading choices this month, and we'll get to that, but far and away, I read much better things in October than I did in September, and I hope you're proud of me. Now, when I say this video is everything that I read in October, that's a little bit of a lie. I'm actually recording this on October 31st, on Halloween, because look, I need someone to appreciate my Rose Winters costume. I didn't do this for nothing, but I'm not going anywhere today, so it's just you and me. Maybe we'll fudge the numbers a little bit. If I finish a book tonight, it'll just go into next month's video, and we'll have all forgotten it by then, myself included, so we'll be none the wiser. Overall, I read 17 books this month, which is kind of bad for me, like numbers-wise. Usually I read more, but it's good for me in the sense that I hate editing videos, and that'll make my life a lot easier when it comes to editing this one. You'd have thought that I'd read more horror books in October than I did in September, considering that this is, you know, spooky month and whatnot, but I didn't. I'm having something of a Brandon Mull phase, as you will see, and as I also mentioned last month. Don't judge me, or do, because I'm not the boss of you. I'll try to avoid spoilers in my summaries, you know the drill. If there are any, I'll put a timestamp, and you'll know when to skip to. Without further ado, let's talk books. First thing I read was More Than This by Patrick Ness. The book begins with a boy in the ocean drowning, and then he wakes up, and he's in an urban wasteland, and he kind of doesn't remember a lot, and so his memories like start coming back to him slowly. He has to figure out where he is and what's going on. I can't really tell you more than that without spoiling the entire book. It's kind of one of those books where you have to just go into it not really knowing what's going on and figure it out as you go, and I feel like you'll get more out of it that way. It's not my usual style, in all honesty. I liked the emphasis on friendship and hope and realizing that the world doesn't revolve around just you as a person. I thought it was really good, message-wise, writing-wise, character-wise. It was solid. It probably could have been shorter. It's like over 400 pages, I think. But again, it's not my usual style, so it may have just been me wanting to be done with the book. I feel like you should read it for yourself and decide. There's queer characters and romance, which I was not expecting, but I'm thrilled. Obviously, I was like, oh, so it's gay. I would say with this one, be sure to look up warnings ahead of time because some trigger warnings do apply. It gets pretty heavy at points, but all in all, it was a very good book, and I'm glad that I read it. Next, I read Telephone Ringing in the Labyrinth by Adrienne Rich. Now, this is a poetry collection, so it's kind of hard to give a plot summary for a poetry collection. Confession, I feel really stupid every time I read poetry. Either it's like the most profound thing in the world, or I'm reading it and I'm just going, huh? This was very much a huh one for me. I just felt like I wasn't getting it. Maybe I wasn't in the right headspace, maybe I'd just been reading too much Middle English poetry for my Brit Lit class, who knows. I have a poetry class next semester, so I'm hoping that I will be able to come back and revisit this with fresh eyes afterwards. I read Four Treasures of the Sky by Jenny Tingui Zhang. So this is a historical fiction. It's about a 19th century Chinese girl whose parents disappear when she's a child, and so she's essentially orphaned. And she goes to a big city, and eventually she gets trafficked to America and a brothel there, and then she escapes from the brothel to Idaho. So it's based on true events. It really delves into the anti-Chinese immigration laws and xenophobia in 19th century America, which is a subject that I feel like a lot of American education really just doesn't elaborate on. I was like aware of it because I took a women's history in America class last semester that actually taught me about it, which was not something that happened like at all for me in high school. But I feel like it's a good way to get an emotional connection to it more so than just like a historical fact, if that makes any kind of sense. I feel like I learned a lot from it, and it made me think. Also, it's just beautifully written. The writing style is wonderful. The way it talks about calligraphy, just physical descriptions in general, and how it talks about people, it's beautiful, beautiful writing, and I really enjoyed it. Definitely look at content warnings beforehand if this is something that you may think may be a problem for you, but I highly recommend this book. So after that, I read Fablehaven, Rise of the Evening Star, and Grip of the Shadow Plague by Brandon Mull. Those are books 2 and 3 of the Fablehaven series, it's a 5-book series. I guess I should probably summarize the first one because I didn't summarize it last month because I didn't read it last month. I read it back in like July or August when I decided to revisit the Fablehaven books and then kind of left off for a while. Essentially, Fablehaven is a series about these 2 siblings, Kendra and Seth Sorensen, who have to spend some of the summer with their grandparents while their parents are going on a cruise. What happens is they discover that their grandfather actually runs a preserve for magical creatures. Basically, in book 1, they're on the preserve, and then they have to save the preserve from a demon and a witch that get loose. In book 2, they're trying to find a magical artifact on the preserve. They're back on the preserve, while there's a traitor in their midst. And in book 3, they have to save the preserve from a magical plague that's threatened to turn every creature dark and completely overthrow the whole place. The overarching story of the series is about how they're trying to keep the Society of the Evening Star, which is the bad guys, from overthrowing all the preserves and letting the demons out of their centuries-old prison, Zizix. I read these books as a kid. Obviously, I think I mentioned this maybe last month. I read them a lot. I actually can remember exactly when and where and who introduced me to these books, and I've read them many times over the years, but it's been a while since I read them, so I thought I would go ahead and revisit them as an adult and see if they hold up. I have to say, there's some aspects of Brandon Mull's writing that have not aged well. This is not the worst on that front. We will get to that. But I'm definitely more aware of some of these aspects than I was as a kid, obviously. For instance, he introduced one of his first characters who is explicitly not white, and then the narration immediately goes on to be like, but he speaks English so well. And it's like, Brandon. There's a lot of like stuff like that. It's little, it's nothing really overt. It's still not great.
Hey, this is Editing Xana coming to you live from the future, and I somehow completely forgot to mention this in the video, even though I had it in my notes. Something else that is in Fablehaven is there's a creature that is known as a golem, and I do not know enough. I've done some research, but I definitely don't know enough, and I'm not Jewish, so I can't say definitively, whether or not this is offensive that it's been put in there, but I do know that it is a creature that has its origins and it's specific to Jewish folklore and religion and probably shouldn't have been used. So again, not something that I know enough about to be able to say anything very useful on the topic, but it is something that I am aware of and that I definitely am keeping in mind while reading. Okay, bye.
Generally though, to the positives, the world building is phenomenal. Just in all of the books, it's really good. He has these really fun, familiar, yet unique takes on a lot of magical creatures. There's a lot of classic magical creatures like naiads and brownies and fairies and satyrs and stuff. And then he also has more original takes on things like unicorns. His zombies. The zombies were fun. He's got trolls, giants, fairies, that sort of thing. Book 3 also has really interesting dialogue on the matter of light versus dark and the nature of magical creatures and that kind of thing. I don't think I appreciated it as much when I was a kid, but now I'm an adult and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I also have to say, this seems off topic, but it's not. I hate time travel in almost all forms of fiction, which seems counterintuitive because I was a Doctor Who fan like 10 years ago, but it was 10 years ago. However, Brandon Mull, in 3 separate series, this one included, manages to write time travel in a way that I actually enjoy, which is just deeply impressive to me. I don't know how he does that, but he does. Also, Kendra and Seth are just really fun characters, especially if you're like me and you love sibling dynamics. They're great. It's got, the bookish, responsible older sibling and then like the chaotic, courageous younger sibling. They have a really fun banter dynamic. Also, they have this great light-dark dichotomy going on between the two of them. Love that. Really fun. Fablehaven has a lot of wonderful characters, especially, I've already mentioned Kendra and Seth. I love Vanessa and Warren. There's some other ones, but they don't come in books 2 or 3, so I can't talk about them yet. Maybe next month. We'll talk about Bracken next month. The series also, I have to say, like, I've got to hand it to this guy. This series is so well constructed. Everything ties into everything else. I know it, like, that's how stories are supposed to be. You're supposed to have things that are set up in one book and it carries through into the next, and it's like, oh, remember that thing that was set up for this. That's how writing is supposed to be. But a lot of the times that's not how it is, with, you know, the twists thrown in for shock value. But Fablehaven is so well constructed in that things that happen in book one that you don't think are important actually come back, and they're in like book two or in their book three, and they're actually really important. And he does a wonderful job of revealing new information and new concepts throughout the series in a way that is really natural and works well. It's like, this has been there the whole time. It's not, I just threw this in to explain this. It's not like a Deus Ex Machina, I guess, would be how to explain that. After Fablehaven, I read Truth and Beauty by Anne Patchett. Now, if you saw my video last month, you know I'm a big Anne Patchett girly. I love Anne Patchett. This is, ironically, this is not one of her fiction books. Again, I'm reading her nonfiction. This is a memoir. It's about her friendship with a fellow writer, Lucy Greeley, who I had never heard of before, but now that I read this memoir, I am dying to get my hands on her autobiography. I've got to read that. As you know, I love Anne's writing. This is no exception. It's a wonderful study about friendship and love and loss and writing and who we are as people and what is beauty and all that. I thought it was beautiful. It's very, very good and very heart-wrenching and very touching. As always, read Anne Patchett. After that, I read the first 3 books of the Five Kingdoms series, which is another 5-book series by Brandon Mull. Yeah, he's back again. I did warn you. So those first 3 books are Sky Raiders, Rogue Knight, and Crystal Keepers. The basic premise is, on a Halloween trip to a haunted house, Cole, the main character, Cole Randolph, and like all of his friends are kidnapped and brought to another world called the Outskirts, where they're sold based on their magical potential. Magic in the Outskirts is called shaping. Each of the 5 kingdoms has their own different kind of shaping. I don't know why I'm talking with my hands so much. Cole ends up at this place called Skyport, where there's like floating castles, and they go raid the floating castles. He accidentally encounters one of the High King's daughters. They are all presumed dead, and they have been presumed dead for 60 years, but what actually happened is the king kidnapped his daughters, stole their shaping abilities so he could have them, and then imprisoned them, but they escaped, and because they don't have their powers, they've all been frozen at whatever teenage ages the powers were stolen from them at for the last, like, 60 years. But now their shaping powers are starting to escape back into the wild, and they have to get their powers back and defeat the king. So they all get involved in the rebellion. Cole gets involved with one of the king's daughters, and they get involved in the rebellion with some other kids, and then they're basically traveling. In each book, they go to each of the 5 kingdoms to free one of his daughters and get their powers back. They also, so they're going, you know, from kingdom to kingdom. There's like a core group of characters, and then there's very colorful cast of characters who come in for each kingdom. Cole, the whole time, is also discovering his own powers and trying to rescue his friends who are all brought to the Outskirts and free them. In Sky Raiders, book 1, we're in Sambria, which is, magic is just shaping there, and it's essentially based on the space between, like, waking and dreaming. Then they go to Eloir. Shaping is called enchanting there, and it's kind of the line between reality and imagination. And book 3 is Zeropolis, where shaping is called tinkering, and it's like technomancy. Everything's really high-tech there. There's obviously other 2 kingdoms, but I haven't finished those books yet, so you'll have to hear about them in another video. The 3rd book is where things really start to pick up. Not to say that the first 2 books are bad. In the first book, I was rereading it and I was kind of like, wow, I really don't like any of you. I didn't like any of the characters. They were all kind of mean, and I was just not there for it. Book 1, revisiting it, I wasn't as fond of it as I was in like the 2010s when I was reading this for the first time. Book 2 gets better, but it's not like, I wasn't super invested in it. The main reason I was reading these books was to get to book 4, in which something happens that I will not tell you about because it is spoilers. But book 3, it's just, things start to click. You've got, like, the stakes are higher, everything, you're really settled into the world. The characters have got a better dynamic going on. Some of the characters who were really annoying in book 1 have grown to the point where they are less annoying. There's also like this massively epic twist that happens in book 3, and it's so good. It's so good, okay? I will say, one of the things that I absolutely hate about this series, and I'm gonna be a little bit of a hypocrite here, so I need you to bear with me. One of the things that I really hate is like the romantic angle, because I get that you're in middle school or whatever. They're like 12, by the way. I get you're in middle school and you have crushes, and that's like a thing, but it's very much like it's really, really prevalent in Five Kingdoms. It's like, we're gonna talk about Cole's crush on Jenna again. We're gonna talk about Jace's crush on Mira again. And I really hate it. I'm like, just, you're 12. Shut up about your crushes. I'm sorry. I don't want to hear it. It's uncomfortable. You're 12. Be quiet. You're not getting married. That being said, I'm gonna be a hypocrite and say, while I was like in the middle of book 2, I accidentally queered Jace in my head. I was like, bro's kind of gay. It spiraled out of control from there. And now I cannot look at Jace and Cole and their dynamic without being a little bit unnormal about it. But moving on from all of that, the magic system in this book, okay, I'm going to talk about magic systems a lot this video because I've been reading a lot of fantasy, but oh my god, I love the magic system in Five Kingdoms. You would think that every book having a completely different magic system in each kingdom would get kind of like tiring and chaotic and you wouldn't enjoy it anymore because it would feel kind of gimmicky. It doesn't. It works really well. You spend the whole book getting used to this different type of magic, and then the next book they leave and they have to get used to a completely different type of magic, and it works so well for some reason. I don't know what it is. Every kingdom has this unique and fascinating type of magic. I really enjoy learning about it. Most fantasy series, especially like Fablehaven and Beyonders, will have just the one primary magic system. Like Beyonders just has Edomic, and Fablehaven just has like the magical creatures and all of those aspects. But Five Kingdoms has one core magic and like 5 different types, and it's so fascinating how that's woven into the series. It's really cool. I'm gonna like stop geeking out about it. Book 4. I will take a moment to talk about book 4 briefly. I didn't finish it this month, so I'm not gonna talk about it, but I will let you know that in book 4, things get wild. Things are so good. The world building, the plot, the characters, everything in book 4 is wonderful. But I haven't finished it, so I can't talk about it this month. You better buckle up in November because I'm going to be so insufferable. Just a warning. Also, there's a robotic dragon, if you even care. After Five Kingdoms, I read Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. This was recommended to me by a friend. So Under the Whispering Door is about this guy. His name is Wallace. He is an absolutely terrible, shitty person. And then he dies. And he wakes up at his own funeral as a ghost. And he realizes that, in fact, nobody likes him, and he is a terrible, shitty person. He then meets a reaper who's there to guide him to a ferryman who will, like, at a way station, who will help him cross on to the next life. The reaper, her name is May, and the ferryman, his name is Hugo. So the way station is in a tea shop that Hugo runs, and May works there. And Wallace isn't quite ready to move on yet, so he sticks around the tea shop, and he gets to know Hugo and May and the other people who are there, and he slowly becomes a better person. And kind of maybe sort of falls in love with Hugo a little bit. My thoughts. First off, this book is so funny. I cried laughing reading this. It was absolutely hysterical at parts. And also, it's just really heartfelt. Wallace is this wonderful example of a main character who is not a good person at all. He's like kind of horrible. And then he realizes that, and he works to be better, and he gets better, and it's just really encouraging to read. I feel like a lot of us, especially in this day and age, we kind of grapple with the fact that maybe we're not good people, or like we've made mistakes, because everyone has made mistakes and everyone has learned and grown from them, and you're always going to be like looking back and realizing something that you did a long time ago, or maybe not a long time ago, was not great, and then you feel bad about it. But feeling bad about it isn't the end of it. You can grow and become a better person, and you don't have to be that person who you don't like. This book really leans into that, and you see so much positive character growth that it's just really hopeful overall. It's great commentary on like what it is to be human and what it is to love and how it's never too late to be a better person. And I love that. honestly. I feel like that's something that kind of everybody maybe needs to read. You need something like that to tell you it's okay. You can get better. After that, I read, oh boy, I read All's Well by Mona Awad. And oh my god, okay. So I'd previously read Bunny by her, and I have to say, she has this unique ability to just confuse the fuck out of me and make me so worried. So the basic summary of this book is a theater teacher has chronic pain, and she's attempting to put on a college production of All's Well That Ends Well, the Shakespeare play. She makes a deal with these three mysterious guys she meets in a bar, and the deal is basically she has to put on a good show for them, and in return, her pain will go away. It's like the only way that I can think to summarize this book in any way that makes sense, because like I said, like reading her writing, I'm so confused all the time in the best way. I'm just reading the book, and at all times in the book, I'm like, I don't know what's happening, but it's not good. She has this incredible ability to stress me out so much without letting me know what the heck is happening at any given time. It's like, how did this book even end? I don't know. You know? Mona writes a lot of like unreliable narrator stuff. So if you like unreliable narrators, this is definitely a book for you, because you are getting these just little glimpses of what's actually going on, or what you think is maybe actually going on, and it's like, oh, this is bad. This is so bad. But like you're stuck in the character's head, especially because it's like first person narration, so you're like, nothing good is happening right now, but you don't know exactly what's going on, and it's so stressful and really good. 10 out of 10. Probably scarred me for life a little bit. After that, on a low note, I read Uprooted by Naomi Novik. I'm sure this is probably a lot of people's favorite book. I understand why people would like this, but I didn't. So it's a fantasy story where every set amount of years there's this wizard, and he's protecting this valley from an encroaching enchanted forest, and every, I don't know, like 10 years or so, he takes a girl from the village as tribute, and she comes and lives in his tower for like 10 years or whatever. When the girls come back, they're always different, and so they go off and leave the valley. And this year, he's picking another one, and everybody thinks they know which girl he's going to pick, but it turns out he picks the narrator, Agnieszka, because she has like magical abilities, and he's like, ah, well, I gotta teach you, I guess. So he teaches her to work magic, and they have to defeat the enchanted forest and deal with political intrigue, basically. There's like a lot more to it than that, but it's very complicated to try to sum up in a short amount of time. It could have been shorter. There was a lot going on. It was really long. It wasn't like long, but it was long. It was like over 400 pages. And it felt like I was trying to go a few too many directions for my taste. Like it took like 200 plus pages, I want to say, for them to even get to the point of like the actual plot starting. And it's like, well, what was all of this for then? You know, you have like 200 pages of what feels like an extended prologue, and then things start happening, and it's like, oh, okay. I was more interested in the prologue. I will say I enjoyed the magic system, but at some points it feels like over-explained, and then sometimes it feels under-explained. So you come out of it going, how does the magic work exactly? There's a lot of potential there, and there were a lot of cool things, especially like having to do with the forest and the way in which Agnieszka can work magic, but it's never really expanded upon in any meaningful way. Also, I have to say, of course she and the wizard fall in love. Of course! Like, I wasn't surprised. I started reading this book and I went, oh my god, I swear if they end up in a romantic relationship, and then they did. I was just so mad when I realized what was happening. It's not even that he's like over 100 years older than her. He's over 100 years older than her, by the way. It's not shy about that. It lets you know. Honestly, like, I don't even know how I feel about age gaps in fantasy romance specifically. I haven't given it a lot of thought, or like I have, and I'm just confused about where I stand. So I don't know. It wasn't that, I just didn't like it. Again, there were some really cool world building elements, and I liked the magical forest and that sort of thing, and I liked the monsters in the forest, but the elements that I liked were not enough to outweigh the elements that I didn't. After that, here we go. The questionable books of the month. I read the Candy Shop War trilogy by Brandon Mull. You thought you had seen the last of him, didn't you? Wrong. So the trilogy would be the Candy Shop War, the Arcade Catastrophe, and Carnival Quest. Now, a little bit of backstory before I get into the summary. Candy Shop War came out in like 2007, and it was just supposed to be a standalone. And then Arcade Catastrophe came out later in like 2012, He got a lot of requests to continue the series, and so he did. And then everybody, after Arcade Catastrophe, assumed that there was going to be a third book. And I think there was supposed to be, but it just never happened and never happened and never happened until, lo and behold, earlier this year, in like March, Carnival Quest comes out. And we're all like, oh my god, the finale to Candy Shop War? So that's the context for why I reread these. So the basic premise is that these four friends, Nate, Trevor, Summer, and Pigeon, discover a magician runs the new local candy shop, and she will give them magical candy in exchange for them doing like missions for her around town. She's on some like treasure hunt. Then they realize in the midst of this that she is not one of the good guys, and they've been helping the wrong side all along. So then they have to swap sides and figure out how to defeat her. In book 2, the magician's, like, her evil brother comes to town with an arcade, and it's pretty much the same. They infiltrate his operation, trying to bring him down and stop his treasure hunt. And then in the third book, the third white sibling comes to town with a carnival, and the kids are, like, trying to solve the secret of the carnival and why so many people have been disappearing around it. That is the basic premise. These books have not aged well. Or more specifically, the first book has not aged well. I don't even think there's like a delicate way to put this. There is magical blackface candy. There's this candy, and it changes your race for like an hour for purposes of disguise, and it's called melting pot mixers, which is bad enough. But there's also the fact that like they use them, I think, twice in the first book, and like both times, there's just some really questionable, if not like straight up racist things going on with their like commentary and stereotyping and what they did. It's not good. It's also like three of those four main characters are white, and they're using these powers, and it's like and I had completely forgotten about this. I wouldn't, like, for context, I haven't read Candy Shop War in at least 12 years. I was probably like maybe 10 when I read Candy Shop War, so I had completely, like, this was not in my head. I remembered none of it. And then I reread it and I was like, what? I almost did not finish rereading it. The only reason I did was because I was like, I've waited like 12 years for Carnival Quest. I've got to finish this, but I didn't want to. Kind of wish that I had just read a summary instead. I had forgotten huge sections of the plot, and I was just like, that's fine. You know, it'll be fun, right? No, it was not fun. It was not. There's also like this really uncomfortable derogatory commentary on drugs and homeless people. And okay, I understand it's like topical in the first book to be like, hey kids, don't take weird substances from strangers. That could be dangerous. Like, I understand. But then it just kind of keeps going. You keep reading and you're like, no. Like in the third book, one of the characters is like, yeah, I fought off a zombie. And this kid just goes, there's probably a meth addict. And you're like, what? It's not cash money, sir. There are some good things though. So in book 1, there is, yet again, an interesting depiction of time travel. Like I said, in 3 separate series, he has time travel that I like, and this is one of them. That's like the one highlight of book 1. And, you know, most of the magical candy is pretty cool. Most of it. In book 2, there is a new character. Really like her. Her name is Lindy. Unfortunately, he kind of forgets she exists in the third book, and it's just like, where's my girl? And she's just not there. There's some YouTuber guy who kind of replaces her, and it's just disappointing. Especially considering I think the third book is probably the best, but we'll get to that. And of course, book 3 was like the creepy surreal carnival vibes that I've been trying to find all year. I have been looking for a good carnival book all freaking year, and I've not found a good one. I mean, there was Fantastic Land, but I wasn't looking for murder. I was looking for like creepy spooky carnival, and I finally got creepy spooky carnival. It was wonderful. So, you know, book 1, we know the issues in book 1. Book 2, it really didn't feel like it was enough about the arcade. You go into it thinking, oh, like magical arcade games, and it's like, no. Stamps. Okay? Book 2, I'd forgotten like huge sections of the plot. Like, I know I read it because I was reading it and I was like, yeah, I've read this before, and then I was like reading it and I was like, did I read this before? Also, book 2 is the book where like you wish Nate wasn't the protagonist the most. He's the main character. There's like the core 4 and then later like the core 5. But Nate is like the POV character most of the time, and he's the one who always ends up saving the day. And in book 1, it's fine, because he's, like, a new character. In book 2, he's, like, not unbearable. But in book 3, man, he's so boring. And I don't know if it's just because Brandon Mull has done a lot of similar characters to him. Both Seth in Fablehaven and Cole in Five Kingdoms are very similar to Nate. He kind of has like this one-note guy character he'll write in all of his books, and congratulations to Beyonders for stepping outside of that with Jason. Jason's very much not the same. Nate is probably the worst. If I had to rank the Brandon Mull protagonists, Nate is like dead last. Sorry, dude, kind of hate you. You're really boring. He just gets to do all the cool things, and you're like, I wish this was not Nate. I wish this was Pigeon, or Trevor, or Lindy, or literally anyone else. But it's Nate. He's bearable, but not ideal. To be fair, I do need to complain. It's about magical candy, right? The series is supposed to be about magical candy, and obviously the first book is very much about that. And the second book did a decent job of, like, combining that, I guess, at points. But book 3, man, what was up with book 3? The candy feels so half-assed. Like, okay, I understand the clown lips. I understand, like, the cannonball one. But why is there candy that turns you into water or, like, a statue? What does that have to do with a carnival? Does anybody understand this? Am I just stupid? It was, like, cool, magically speaking, but, like, thematically speaking, why is this your carnival candy? I'm very confused. Overall, it started terribly, but it ended on a high note. So, it could have been worse. Not by much, but it could have been worse. I am content to have that close the chapter of my life in which I was reading The Candy Shop War. I'm never touching those books again, like, ever. I'm free now. After that, I read Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth. This is a sapphic horror story, and it's about a movie that is being made about a book about a fictional historical school and, like, a curse that seemed to affect the people who lived there. So it's following the two actresses and the girl who wrote the book as they are making a movie, and they're seemingly being haunted by maybe the same curse that killed all these people in the past. And at the same time, it keeps jumping back to the past timeline and revealing ever so slowly what happened to these girls who they're playing the characters of in the movie. It is really creepy. You know, it's horror, and it did a good job of being horror. The bug horror, loved it. Loved the bugs, loved the woods, loved the ocean. Congratulations to that. 3 cheers for sapphic polycules. I was like, is this gonna be a polycule? And it was. It was. And I was excited. The narrative tone is also, like, so fun and entertaining. It's like this omniscient narrator. It's like a little bit tonally kind of like Percy Jackson style narration, and a little bit like someone who is writing a paper. There's like footnotes, and the footnotes are either like expanding upon information, or they're like the funniest little snarky commentary, or both. And it's just really fun. I got a huge kick out of it while reading. It was delightful. It's really long. It's like over 600 pages, but it didn't feel overwhelmingly long. This was a book where I think the length worked in its favor. It was definitely like you needed pretty much everything that was going on, or if you didn't need it, you liked it, and it worked. I will say there were a few parts that kind of felt unnecessary, but not to the point where like most of the story felt unnecessary, and it wasn't enough that I was going, why is this in here? It's also the kind of horror that you don't fully understand what's going on. Like, it kind of ends, and it's pretty ambiguous, but it's not like bad writing ambiguous, it's good writing ambiguous. Here's a point where I could go on this huge long tangent about storytelling and plot crafting and writing and resolution and rules of writing and who those rules benefit and who made those rules, but you know, whatever. This is not a creative writing workshop, this is not a college class, it's not a paper that I'm writing, so I'm gonna spare you guys the really long tangent that I could go on, but I'm gonna let you know that I could. In this case, it was an instance of everything wraps up and you're kind of left going, huh, but like in a good way. You don't fully understand it, and so it keeps you thinking about it, and not everything in life is like perfect and neat and wraps up and ties with a little bow, so I kind of appreciated it. Not everything needs to be explained to you, or not everything needs to be able to be explained. And I liked it. Last but not least, on a completely different note, I read Woodswoman 3, book 3 of the Woodswoman Adventures by Anne Labastille. Sorry if I totally butchered her last name. So Anne was essentially, she was an ecologist who lived in the Adirondack wilderness. It's in New York. She moved there and built a cabin out on a lake in like the 1960s and lived there for like 30, 40 years, maybe more. And so like Woodswoman, Beyond Black Bear Lake, Woodswoman 3, and I think there's a 4th book. They're all like a memoir of her years spent living there. Like it's the first 10 years and then the first 20 years and then that sort of thing. So this is about her 3rd decade living in the cabin. I have previously read Woodswoman like 2, maybe 3 times, maybe more. I'm very fond of Woodswoman. And then I read Beyond Black Bear Lake earlier this year, and I was like finally able to get my hands on Woodswoman 3 via interlibrary loan. Now I'm waiting on the 4th book, so fingers crossed that it comes in. I love nature, I love the mountains, I love like kind of survivalist books, I want to say. Maybe not like survivalist, but you know, like My Side of the Mountain, that kind of thing. I'm a sucker for that. There's a really pleasant like nature aspect to it. You get a glimpse of a kind of life that you maybe never get to live or would like to but won't be able to. She has like the wildest stories about things that have happened to her. Like there was a mouse that lived in her truck for like a month. Her barns were burned down and like arson, that kind of thing is crazy. You know, and she tells you about the process of building the cabin or building another cabin or all this stuff and writing. And I mean, it's putting 2 of my favorite things together, which is like mountains and writers. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sold. So if you're interested in anything about that or ecology or that sort of thing, definitely read it. You can learn a lot from her books. She talks about like the history of the parks, about issues she was fighting against. You know, she was an advocate for protecting the environment and combating global warming and that sort of thing. And it's definitely like, it's still very applicable, even if the laws in that point were different. I feel like it's still very applicable to problems that we have today, if not, you know, 1-for-1 issues that are still going on. And also she's very much an advocate for like reconnecting with nature, and it's just really nice and beautiful to read some of her stuff sometimes. If you are a dog lover or sensitive to like animal suffering or death, definitely go into this aware that it's books set over a span of like 30-40 years. Dogs don't live that long. She goes through several dogs. She has them, at least 2 of them, potentially more because I haven't read the other books, but at least 2 of them die, and she does go into that. She goes into the detail. She explains what happened, kind of excruciating detail at points. It's very sad. If that's going to be a problem for you, be aware that that's a thing. Does the dog die? Yes. Okay, I think that is all for this video. Next month, I am not going to check out as many library books because this month, like all of my books, like all my holds came in at once, and it overwhelmed me so much. And reading is supposed to be fun. It's not supposed to be me going, oh my god, I have to finish this book before it's due. So I have a lot of books that I own that I have not read for a while, and my sister just sent me more. You may have noticed, you probably didn't, but I'm gonna pretend that you did, that I completely reorganized my bookshelves. So I have a lot of books over here that I have not read and I have been meaning to read. So there may be a lot of horse books next month, along with all of the Brandon Mull books that I am still reading. We're gonna see what kind of an interesting mix comes out of that. Right, thanks for watching. Happy belated Halloween from me, and feel free to drop your recommendations down in the comments if you have any. I will see you next month. I don't know if you guys can hear, but like my dad is downstairs in the kitchen and he's making so much noise. So I'm sorry if there's just random dish noises in the background.